This is the Need to Know podcast from the Computer Information Agency with information for business and IT professionals. To support this podcast, visit donation.ciaops.com. This is episode 51 with Ryan Phillips. Welcome along to another Need to Know podcast from the Computer Information Agency. My name is Robert Crane, and in this episode I'm joined by Ryan Phillips, a Technical Account Manager at Microsoft Online Services Division. Ryan, welcome.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks.
Okay, so I've asked Ryan along here today to speak to us about Office 365 and specifically to give us some more information about those tough things that typically we need to get our Office 365 connected to our local Active Directory, that being Single Sign-On and ADFS and all those sort of things that most people shy away from. So I suppose before we get too far into it, Ryan, I'll let you introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, so been with Office 365 for about 6 years. Helped start the BPOS, the old or the very first version of Office 365. Started the support team. Have been involved with migrations, transitions, bringing customers into the cloud, and all of the aspects in between. Today, as you mentioned, we'll probably be talking more about identity and authentication, talking about the components and how that works with Office 365. But we may stray a bit. There's so many different things involved with 365, so we'll play it by ear. But today I'd like to take advantage of talking about those things that really do cause customers some problems, whether that's managed domains versus federated, and really what that means, the components that come into play with those, and really how they all come together to really provide administrative and end-user usage experiences. And we'll try to tackle that. And as you mentioned earlier, we may veer off into some other things, but really identity, authentication, and usability is really where I'd like to spend most of our time today.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll certainly be able to hit the mark there. So probably to kick things off a bit, why don't you just give us an overview of, what Office 365 is and, why it's, something that a lot of customers and end users should be looking at?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. Back in the early days, I'd say, of business productivity online services, or BPOS, it was our first stab, right? And really it was based around 2007 with Office 365 that came out about a year and a half ago. It's all based on the 2010 services. Now, whether that is Exchange, sister services of the Forefront Online Protection, or FOPI or FOP, however you'd like to pronounce it. We've got that. We've got the SharePoint services for collaboration, document collaboration, and then Link Online, right? Now, currently, we're going through a process of upgrade, which means that we're now moving out of the 2010 environment and into 2013. Now, some people would call it our Wave 14 or current environment to Wave 15, but under the covers, it's really just a 2010 to 2013 upgrade, so to speak. And so today I'll be trying to talk more in the 2010 space, but as we go through some of the components, I will probably call out some of the 2013 upgrades in terms of features, functionality, and the differences in some of those components as we go. But Office 365 really is a productivity suite based on Microsoft products that are run in a data center, or in this case, multiple data centers, that really do provide everything from Office downloads, where you can provide your customers a full suite, whether that's running an MSI package as we do today, or in the new 365 having click to run based on streaming that Office suite down. And whether you have the Office suite or you're running in a purely browser environment, maybe some people would call it a kiosk mode, so to speak, where you're using OA and you're using SharePoint or Link Online, but using a browser-based version, we've really got a service and an interface for just about everyone out there. Whether you are a Microsoft customer or a Microsoft shop that uses purely Office, maybe you're running Macs or some other version, we should have a service and either client or web browser type of solution for you.
So I suppose the question is, I've seen some figures recently about the uptake of Office 365 and how well it seems to be doing. I mean, can you speak to that as to how well it's being adopted and what sort of growth you're seeing in the product?
Well, it's interesting. I had mentioned earlier that we had our first version back, I think, in '08. And it was slow growth, right? And as we move forward with more and more product, the products that we run as our services are slowly, and I would say even now in our Wave 15, almost on par with everything that you'll get in an on-prem deployment. And that was really the differentiator. A lot of admins said, look, I love the service. You can really cut down on the overhead, the expense. By paying for the services, you get the latest and greatest all of the time, right? And so it really takes a lot of headache off of administrators. But with that change, right, a lot of customers are a little leery, right? They don't want to just wholesale change everything that they have. So I would say over the last 3 to 5 years, we've really seen significant growth, not just the small to mid-size, but we've seen enterprise customers. We have seen city, state, and government agencies move into the cloud. And as time goes on, I think we'll see more and more people move into the cloud. I don't have specific numbers on our deployments, but I could say that we've got everyone from the mom and pops to the small to mid-size, every vertical, every different type of business out there, all the way up to, I believe we've got customers running in the 200 to 300,000 object limits or objects with users, contacts, groups, domains, doing, and we'll get into some of this later, but multiple forest federations, configurations. It's gotten very, very large, very complex customers with just about any type of configuration you'd want. And we're not a pure Microsoft shop in that you must run Active Directory, you must run Exchange. We can do mail federation, configuration, coexistence. We can even do, and we'll talk a bit about this later, but shibboleth and maybe even doing some directory synchronization with Active Directory. And maybe not using so much ADFS or Active Directory Federation services for authentication, but leveraging a new service that's coming out with Directory Sync, which allows you to sync not only users, contacts, groups, values, and attributes, but also passwords as well, providing maybe a lower level of single sign-on where your credentials in your Active Directory are not so much locked up anymore in AD, but we can sync all of that into the cloud to make end user experience a single sign-on experience. So it's a single click operation, making it very easy for people to move into the cloud such that users really don't know where they are anymore. They have the same logins, the same passwords. They just click their application or their browser and they're up and running.
Well, I think that, again, probably the thing that, a lot of people are asking these days, I mean, what's the value from the customer's point of view? I mean, what do they get out of the service? I mean, we all provide technology to help the customer provide or to do their job better. The Office 365, stack, what does that offer as a value proposition for the end user?
Right. Well, across the board, and I've mentioned this earlier, whether it's Office Suite integration, using the browsers, we've got productivity in just about every one of our services. We can call that a productivity stack, right? Whether it's messaging, SharePoint, Link, the way that the services come together so that we could start right now, as we're doing on this call, with a Skype call. We could move that into a Link instant message or even into a Link conference call. We've got integration between Outlook and the way that it shows presence, right? Whether that's in Outlook, OA, SharePoint. So everything is really tied together in a very, very tight fashion. even at the services level. So whether users are interested in working, and we've seen people where we've got secretaries that are doing day-to-day work just in Word, but with the ability of all of the integrational pieces, doing a Word, but being able to create SharePoint sites, bring people in, promote them, and provide them with roles and responsibilities, and through that create these sites, document collaboration, and then elevate that out, whether it's doing instant messaging, conference calls, high definition, as you know, link conference calls using multiple chats, using audio, video, all sorts of things that really do provide not just email and a place to put documents, but a way to collaborate in just so many different ways. It's really up to the imagination of how you want to run your business and how you want to use the services in a day-to-day activity. And again, it's not limited to just those Windows users. We've got full suites for the Macintosh, and we've got add-ins and applications for mobile phones, iOS devices, iPads, and so forth. So it really does come down to how do you as a business want to use these services, and then really, I would say, explore the different applications and services to understand how you can use them to the fullest benefit and how you can tie a lot of these together to make it a very robust, not only business or a service or platform for your business, but to really unleash the productivity of the end users. Most of them they see email as email, but once you show them some of these tips and tricks about how to use the services and how they can all work together, it makes for a very compelling story and really helps unleash the business using the services, and not just a somewhat way of email and IM and presence, but really tying a lot of these things together. We're really starting to see the vendors out there tie a lot of these features and services together in some very unique ways. Whether, we've already talked about Exchange and SharePoint and Link, but we've also started to pull in Intune Online and CRM Online to run a lot of the other business proposition, whether it's using the CRM services or Intune, to not just roll out applications to the desktop, but also to manage and do inventory and things like that. So while we've started with email and SharePoint and those things, we're always expanding that business to bring more services into the overall services so that businesses can leverage them as they need.
Okay, I think one of the major concerns, or one of the things that a lot of people speak about with any online service is, the security aspect of it. So, can you speak to the security? How that is important to Office 365 and what the impact that can have these days.
Yeah, well, security really is not in and of itself a very hot topic, but where the data resides, e-discovery, certifications in terms of what we support. I'm not sure if I've got the specifics on, say, the compliance, but I know HIPAA is a big one. ISO, we've got many. I believe we've got 4 of the top security certifications for the different services in terms of data center services themselves, how the data is actually stored, right, such that no one at the Microsoft data centers, operations people, no one is able to access that particular information. If you're into different business units, such as processing credit cards, for example, we do have compliancy there. Along with Exchange Online having possibly transport rules. They give you the option to query the messages inbound and outbound to say, if you're sending, say, an email message and that has a credit card, I want to flag that. I want to alert my compliance and e-discovery officers, and I want to reject that message until I can be sure that that mail has gone through. And that's just on the messaging side, one small little tidbit. SharePoint and Link Online also have their compliancy and security components as well. It just depends on how they're being used. Right, today in email, there's lots of mail just flowing all over the place, and we need to be able to not only be securely aware of what's coming and going, but also be able to track that, whether it's through litigation hold or e-discovery, searching those messages across all mailboxes within a company, and even bringing, say, Exchange Online and Exchange On-Prem into the picture and doing federation, which extends your Exchange or messaging organization. All of these concepts extend not only to the online, but also the on-premise environment, giving administrators really a one-stop shop where they can manage all of these features, compliancy and litigation and security aspects as one organizational unit without having environments over here and over there. It really pulls it all together into one federated unit, so to speak.
Okay, so I mean, we've sort of touched on this topic, and I think that that's what we'd like to obviously get some more information from you about. You've got two ways of going about the Office 365 setup. You've got where you have the identity all in the cloud, and people obviously have a login there, and maybe also have a second login to the network. But then you've got this concept of the federation, where you can have a single sign-on. So you sign on once to your local Active Directory or local network, as you do, and that then allows you also to log into the Office 365 services. So do you want to give us a bit of background on those two and how federation sort of works in theory?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really the number one. I would say messaging is the biggest service that we have out there. Everyone uses it in some form or fashion. And when we say federation, that does tend to bring about lots of different discussions, because you not only have messaging federation, but you've also got what I'd call identity federation. And really what this comes down to is the fact that when you have an on-premise environment, you've probably spent lots of time working to pull this together, right? Years and years. You may have Active Directories that are a decade old, and you don't want to have to leave that behind. And so we have this concept called Directory Synchronization, which works with AD 2000 or above, and it allows you to synchronize users, contacts, and groups within your Active Directory forest into your online tenant. And what this allows admins to do not only is to leverage their AD infrastructure so that they don't have to recreate, but all management of the AD, that is then synchronized into the cloud. So as you do modifications, creates, deletes, disables, and so forth, that gets synchronized into your tenant. So you as an administrator can decide through a new feature that's come out called DirSync filtering, because at the default it will do the entire forest, all domains, all users, contacts, and groups. But we found that with so many large ADs these days, we've got filtering that allows you to specify which domains, which OUs will be synchronized into the cloud. And that gives the admin that one-stop shop to do all of their AD work, and then that to then flow into the online tenant. And from there, it's just a matter of the administrator activating individuals and giving them a subscription so that they can start doing that work. And of course, if as users leave, as they come and go, all of that work is done in the authoritative Active Directory and then synchronized into the cloud. Again, giving them a one-stop shop for all of their management. And then that is all picked up and flows into the cloud, so they don't have to worry about managing in multiple places. Now, this allows you to manage or use those identities in AD and bring those into the cloud. Now, when you synchronize into the cloud, that does not mean it's the same account. It will still have you'll have an online account and an on-premise account. Okay, so they're two separate types of accounts. But what you can do is bring in what's this concept called federation. Now that we've done DirSync and we have identity federation, in that the same account, the user account is in both locations, what we want to do is, instead of having maybe a separate username and a separate password, because in effect these are separate accounts, what we can do is we can convert this domain, this custom domain, in this case say contoso.com. We will configure it to be federated. And what that means is, instead of having a separate username and a separate password in AD and the cloud, we're going to consolidate and we're going to leverage our on-premise AD account and password. And what this means is that when users access services, whether they're going to the online portal, SharePoint, OA, or what have you, what happens is the service sees this is a federated domain, and any users associated with that domain also take that authentication scheme into account. And what this means is the service will tell the user, go to your Active Directory and authenticate. And by doing that and leveraging your AD credentials, you can then access online services. So the way that customers usually would do this is they start off creating Contoso.com as a custom domain because that's their login, that's their UPN and their AD. They synchronize using DirSync into the cloud, and they're using services. And then they ask their admins, well, why do I have a separate password? Or why are my password policies, say, 90 days in the cloud but 120 days on premise? Why are these separate? Can't we make it easier? So what an admin will do is convert that domain to federated, say over a weekend, right? So that when the users come in on Monday morning, when they go to click Outlook or OA or any of those things, they will notice that it just logs in. They're not prompted for credentials or anything. And that's because the service is telling them to go to their AD to authenticate. And because they're logged into their domain machines on their corporate environment, they're just automatically authenticated and let into the service. And that's usually how we see the natural progression of customers that start out, where they'll start with a managed domain and then move to federated. And by using DirSync and leveraging those identities already in AD, giving admins that one-stop shop for management, and then enabling ADFS so that users can use their AD accounts, it makes it so that users literally don't know where they are in terms of whether they're on-prem or online. They just run their apps or go to these sites, and just everything just kind of magically works. And that would be the identity and the authentication piece of this that really makes Office 365 stand apart from maybe previous versions, where in BPOS they were separate accounts. They could have the same passwords, but they were literally separate accounts. And by bringing in ADFS, this allows us to really bring that single sign-on into focus so that users with proper administrative deployment, right? You would need some ADFS servers to make this happen. But in the end result, users are using all of these services, don't know where they are, so to speak, but they're logging in as normal, and everything just works beautifully, beautifully.
Okay, so what happens in the case we've talked about? Obviously, the user sits down at their normal desktop, they log into their workstation, which has the traditional server sitting somewhere on premise. What happens when they're out and about, when they're out on the road? Obviously, they need to log in with those same credentials to get access to Office 365 services. How does that work when they're outside or away from their desktop?
Yeah, great question. Not most people these days, I would say, are not always in the office. I work from home about 4 days a week. And so when ADFS is in play, you have to, right? So when you access an online service, the service asks who you are, and if you're in a federated domain, that ADFS server must be up. If ADFS is down, user cannot authenticate, which means they cannot access services. So it really does become the number one component for accessing services. So we have two components. ADFS, the server component, is installed on domain joined machines within an Active Directory. And that essentially will take the credentials, talk to a domain controller, and authenticate you as an individual. Now, you can either publish those servers through TMG, ISA, UMG, UAG, what have you, or what most people do is deploy an ADFS proxy. Now, I would say that for any business that must have these services up, they typically will do 2 internal servers that can always be available, and then you'll have 2 proxy servers. Typically are published through the DMZ in some fashion. And when individuals will hit the service will tell them to go to their proxy, the ADFS proxy, which is a forms-based authentication page that allows users to input their credentials. Now, internal users will have DNS that points to the ADFS servers, which are Windows authentication set, which means that if people are outside, they will land on a forms-based page to input their creds. Internally, the users will just go to the ADFS server, and because their domain logged in already, they will automatically send their username and password and automatically get authenticated. Now, this brings up the question, well, there's a different user experience, right? Because if this is single sign-on and you're going to send me to a forms-based authentication page, I'm going to have to enter my credentials again, right? And that's really what it comes down to, is the administrators need to determine if you want to provide true single sign-on and not have to prompt users for credentials, you can publish that ADFS server, which is Windows authentication based. But 9 times out of 10, we're seeing customers go with that proxy because they can't guarantee that the user is domain logged in to the machine trying to access the services. Plus, we don't know if they're using, say, Internet Explorer. We found that with ADFS servers, and we publish those, that IE works beautifully. But it's IIS that runs ADFS has some enhanced security that can cause issues with Chrome and Firefox and so forth. And so 9 times out of 10, you will publish your proxy servers and then have those published through TMG or ISA or what have you, so that external people go to the proxy server, internal people go to the server, ADFS server, and both will authenticate and be able to get that access token so that they can access online services. And really what it comes down to is your ADFS server, or service, so to speak, establishes a trust with the Microsoft Federation Gateway. The online services also trust the MFG. Because the services trust the MFG and the MFG has a trust with your ADFS service, it's a transitive trust. So that when you go to an online service and say, I've been authenticated by this ADFS service, it knows that the MFG was involved and also trusts it, so it will let you in. And that is really the underlying architecture for how ADFS works. It's a transitive trust, and by you setting up ADFS with a federation trust, so to speak, that allows your AD and its credentials to be used when accessing online services.
Okay, so obviously we can handle internal users, we can handle external users, but the configuring the single sign-on can be, I suppose, a little bit daunting for IT professionals to set up. So, I mean, basically you mentioned quickly the steps, but can you go into a bit more detail as to, let's say we've got a server environment and we've already got Office 365 and they're 2 separate identities, and we're looking to make that next step towards total single sign-on. How do we go about that? What do we need to install? How do we sort of configure all this basically?
Right. So you would start with, say, Contoso.com, a custom domain, right? And that domain is really based on what your internal AD UPN value is. So most people would have maybe just a single AD forest, right, with Contoso.com. You could have child domains of NorthAmerica.Contoso or what have you. The first thing you'll want to do is take that Contoso.com and any other namespaces that individuals will be using or want to use. You'll go into your online tenant and create and verify each of those domains. Now, once you've done that, you have proved that you own that namespace. Then you would install Directory Sync, which again picks up all users, contacts, and groups across the entire forest and pushes that information into the cloud. And it's important to do the domain management first, because if you don't, users will come in and their UPN and emails will be contoso.onmicrosoft.com. So that's why you want to do the custom domain. You want to create and verify it before running DirSync, so everyone gets the appropriate UPN and email and IM values. Now, once that's done, you really have a decision to make. Now, you could create the domain you have to do it in PowerShell, Office 365 Remote PowerShell. You could create the domain as a federated domain from scratch, or you can create the domain in the online portal, create and verify, and that would create a managed domain, which you would then have to convert later. But either way, you would want to go in and create that domain and make sure that it's federated. And then once it's federated, then you would obviously, because you're doing the federation work, that implies that you've already installed your ADFS, at least one ADFS server, and that it's internet accessible. And I'll say internet accessible with a caveat, and that right now Exchange Online, for anyone using Outlook, with Exchange Online, it takes users' credentials and then authenticates on behalf of the user, which means when you launch Outlook, Outlook sends the credentials to Exchange. Exchange will then look up and see that the domain is federated and then go to that federation endpoint. And in this case, it would be something like STS for Secure Token Service or ADFS or what have you, sts.contoso.com. That would need to be an internet accessible ADFS server that would take the user's credentials and authenticate that user, and then once done, allow them into their mailbox. Now, this is what's called rich application. If you're using the browser, it works a bit differently. It's called passive authentication. But the same process applies, where you hit an online service, it determines you're a federated user, and then it would send you to your ADFS server for authentication. So the reason I mention all this is all you really need is a single server. If you want to get started and test it out, you can even put it on a domain controller. The issue is that it has to be internet accessible if you're using Outlook. So I probably would not put it on a domain controller, but you'd want to put it on a domain joined machine that is internet accessible or published through TMG, something like that. Then you would run through a set of PowerShell scripts. And what this does is it configures the ADFS, and we support either 2.0, which is on server 2008 R2, or 2012, which is ADFS 2.1. But you would install the component and then run a set of PowerShell commands that configure the ADFS server, basically telling it, talk to the Microsoft Federation Gateway. Here's the public certificate I'm going to use for my ADFS services. And that certificate, the common name, is the URL that will be used when users are redirected. So my certificate would be sts.contoso.com. It's installed on my ADFS server. And then I've run a set of PowerShell scripts that tell the MFG, if anyone ever tries to authenticate against contoso.com, send them to this URL. And then it's up to the client to talk to the server to authenticate. And of course, the server would then take the credentials, talk to a domain controller, and then authenticate the user and then give them that authentication token. Now, this is a very simple deployment, right? Single server. But as you grow out, you will probably want to move away from a standalone server and do a ADFS farm, which means you can have in a default install up to 5 servers in an ADFS farm, so that if any one of those goes down, you still have servers that can respond to those authentication requests. And then for those customers that have people in the field, you'll probably want to install ADFS proxies and then publish those so that DNS outside is pointing to the proxy servers, or you're publishing through TMG, you're publishing to the proxy servers, but internally your DNS servers are pointing to your ADFS servers, right? So that you get that Windows authentication, that single sign-on experience. Because that does trip people up a bit. Why do I get single sign-on when I go to the servers? Because it does Windows authentication, as opposed to going to the proxy servers, which are forms-based authentication. And so there is a bit of a different user experience there, and it's something administrators will have to look at. And if they don't like that forms-based authentication model, they don't want their users inputting that, they could just publish their servers directly, knowing that if the user is not a domain-joined machine, they will have to input their credentials. If they are using a browser that is not IE, they could see some issues with authentication based on how IIS and some enhanced security is configured. But we have full documentation on all of this, so if they do want to deploy one of those models, there's some great documentation on the considerations to think about when they're deploying this.
Okay, so I mean, I think one of the things that people don't appreciate when they do the single sign-on fact is that the identity piece, what verifies your identity, actually is your local AD. So again, if you can't get access to that local AD for whatever reason, you can't authenticate, and then obviously you can't take advantage of any services. I mean, is that correct?
Yes, sir. That is absolutely correct. When a domain is configured for federation, if the user is not able to access an ADFS server, then they are shut out in terms of being able to access online services. It is the number one component that must be up and running at all times for users to access online services. Now, there are a few things that can be done. So in the unlikely event that, say, you have one ADFS server and for whatever reason it goes down, somebody unplugged it over the weekend and everyone comes in Monday morning, what do you do? Administrators can either, and this really is dependent on several factors, mostly the amount of users impacted. What a lot of people can do is just simply bring up another machine, another VM, what have you, quickly install ADFS, apply the certificate that was in use already, say in the other machine, right? And then change those DNS settings to point to this new server, and you should be back up and running quickly. Now, there's times when maybe that's just not possible, and we have seen where administrators can go in, convert the federated domain back to managed. At this point, it generates temporary passwords for all users. And it will ask the administrator, what do you want to convert all users, and do you want to give them temporary passwords? And what can happen is you can convert a domain back, take the credentials, disseminate those out to your individuals, and that will basically change them from a federated user back to a managed user, meaning separate username, separate password in the cloud, and allow them to at least continue to work. And then once ADFS is brought back up, the admin after hours can go back and convert the domain back to federated, and then everything will just pick up and start running as it did before the server actually crashed. But as you can tell, there's some work that needs to be done if you end up losing all of your ADFS servers. And so it's very important to design it to have, I would say, at least two. We always say at least two internally and at least two externally, because if users cannot get to that, then they are in big trouble. And the only way to get around that is to convert the domain, because the domain is either federated or either managed. It can't be both. And so the admin would either need to do this conversion, or they would have to go in, disable directory synchronization, which unlocks management of these online objects, and then switch them for their UPNs and emails, and switch them over to the contoso.on Microsoft, because this default domain is always given. Every tenant gets an on Microsoft.com namespace that is managed. It's not a federated. It cannot be renamed. The authentication type can never be changed. So admins in a smaller company may elect to do that. Instead of converting and going through all of that, they may just go into the online portal, move everyone into this on Microsoft namespace for their login and email and so forth, and allow them to continue in that way until they can get ADFS fixed up.
Okay, I think probably the what I see in the smaller space is there, apart from the confusion around single sign-on and ADFS and getting it to run, is again it seems a fairly there's a lot of resources that you've got to invest. So we're talking about multiple ADFS servers, we're talking about a DirSync server, we're talking about ADFS proxy service. I mean, that's a fair investment in on-premise equipment set up to get a single sign-on. Is it something that again a smaller business can really look at, or is it something that they really perhaps should be waiting for additional features or new things coming down the track?
Great question. I actually, when we were doing the customer technical preview about a year and a half ago, I had several customers that said, I'm sorry, I cannot deploy 8 servers, right? 4 internal servers, 4 external proxy servers, plus a DirSync server, so 9 servers. And they said, I thought Office 365 was supposed to make it simple and single sign-on. What happened to that? And of course, if you want to leverage your AD, right now, ADFS is the only option because that really is the glue that ties, all of this together. But there is, I believe, the beginning of next month, we're very close to deploying a new directory sync tool that allows for password synchronization. For the listeners out there, you may already know about this, may be using Password Change Notification Services, or PCNS. It's been around for a while, but it is a solution that monitors password changes in Active Directory. And what we've done is bundled around that and enabled it in directory synchronization, such that when above and beyond, whether users, contacts, and groups, are disabled, enabled, created, modified, we're also now going to be checking for password changes. And when that happens, what we do is we take that user info, and then we call one of the ADFS or Windows Online PowerShell scripts that does a set MSOL user -identity -password. And what we do is we take that AD password and then we synchronize it into the cloud. And so because of that, it will provide the same it will be this different account, right? Because we're not doing a federated domain, we're doing a managed domain, but we're going to synchronize those passwords. And because it will be, in essence, I would say, the same username and password, you can remove the need for all of the ADFS servers that are out there. Now, again, they will be technically different accounts and different. They will be the same password in this case, but they will be different accounts. And because of that, we're starting to see, and this will again be released in about 2 weeks. We're starting to see lots of interest because now they don't have to worry about server cows, load balancers, all of this other stuff, and all they need to do is install DirSync, enable password synchronization, and now they get all the DirSync and identity benefits, plus they get to sync those passwords, in essence, turning back on single sign-on for that managed domain. So I think it's just a great example of, we had been listening to our Robert, we had been listening to our EDU people for a while, and they said, look, we've been doing this OL sync and we've been doing password synchronization for years. I think it's time that you bring this to Office 365. And our response was always, well, ADFS gives you what you need. But with proper scaling and deployment, we're talking lots of servers, right? And CALs and server people to maintain all of this. So I suspect DirSync password synchronization is going to be a big, big hit. It will lighten the deployment load and allow you to use online services with single sign-on without all the other overhead.
I think there's no question, especially in the smaller space. I mean, most of the people that I know and work with are so keen to do ADFS, but when they look at the investment that's required, equipment wise and also technical wise, it's just too much for typically a small business server style environment. So again, that ability to do password syncing, which some of the small business tools with specific servers currently allow. So I think that's going to be a fantastic addition. It's going to be a huge uptake, and again, move more people into the cloud. The question I've got on that is that DirSync still requires to be a member server. We can't install DirSync on a domain controller.
Yeah, I'm glad that was where I was going next. Great question. So DirSync was based on ILM 2007, which had a hard requirement to not be installed on a domain controller. Actually, originally, you could only install it on an enterprise SKU, but they finally relaxed that. So it does have to be on a domain-joined machine. It has to be a server. It cannot be XP or Vista or Windows 7. So domain-joined 2003 or above. I think mid part of this first half, we're removing support for x86 DirSync, which means you will have to run x64 DirSync at some point, I would say by end of summer. Otherwise, I believe they're turning off the endpoints for the x86 model. I think there is some user strings that they can use to detect it. So anyway, x64 will be the one supported going forward, domain joined, non-domain controller. And that was the one little caveat I was going to state on, who should use this and where should you install it. Because as you know, small business servers, right, for the small companies that have a single DC that runs everything, whether it's SharePoint, Exchange, what have you, you just cannot run DirSync on it. And so in that instance, you would either need to bring another domain controller, domain joined machine online, or run a VM or something like that that is domain joined so that it can perform the DirSync operations.
And I think probably what most people don't realize about the DirSync product is it's designed to be an appliance. You basically set it up, tick the boxes, and leave it sitting in the corner humming away.
Yes. Over the last, I'd say 6.5 years, I've only seen DirSync blow up one time, literally only one time. And there was no fault of the partner team, but what they had done is they brought the notes database over, because we know not everyone runs Microsoft products on-prem, right? And so a lot of times what we'll see is Notes or Domino's people that have their own separate directory. And since you cannot DirSync from another directory other than the Microsoft AD, what they had to do is do a synchronization between the notes, which is the single source of authority. So all the users and mailboxes were created there. We would output and then bring that into AD. And the SMTP, the proxy addresses in AD had notes : and I'm not sure if they ever fixed this, but it literally blew DirSync up. Just it would not finish. It just wouldn't run. And so I would say for all those out there that are doing notes, maybe trying to do an integration between the notes directory and AD, make sure that if you're bringing users over, because AD is the only authoritative directory that we run against, make sure the proxy addresses does not have notes. Make sure it's upper or lowercase SMTP. That would be the one area that I know that will cause DirSync problems. Otherwise, I've seen it handle anywhere from 15 accounts to literally 500,000 objects. And, the default runs the Windows internal, or I'm sorry, the SQL Express database, which I think is 10 gig. But you can do a manual install, run it against SQL, so that if you've got, say, more than 50,000 objects in your AD, it can only handle about that many. So if you've got more than that, you'll want to run against full SQL so that it can handle that amount of objects and then synchronize into the cloud. And as you know, Robert, that I think we made this change about a year ago, that DirSync object limits are also configurable. By default, when you synchronize into the cloud, we'll give you 25,000 objects, 25,000 object quota limit to synchronize your objects. If you have more than that, you have to call support, let them know what you have, and then ask for maybe another 5,000 for some headroom. And that will allow DirSync to continue and do all of the synchronization it needs. Otherwise, it will hit that limit and completely stop. It will throw an event error saying you've reached your quota limit, but at that point, you would have to call support and get that upped. So just kind of keep that in mind in terms of, will the default install work for you? And it really does depend on, do you have around 50,000 or more objects? If more, you'll need to use full SQL, and that should be your that should be your reminder to call support and have them up that limit. Otherwise, you'll end up with not all of your objects in the cloud, and someone will call saying, I can't find this person in the GAL, or the administrator can't find this individual to activate. It's because we've stopped the service from doing all of the synchronizations because they were capped.
Well, I think again, it's I said it's important that I think that many people who haven't looked at it get into the DirSync side of things, begin to understand it, especially with the new product that you're talking about. So not so far away, that allows the password synchronization. I think that's going to be a big game changer. Even if it's got to go on a member server, I think that's a minimal cost, and I think it's a good idea, obviously, to run it on a separate box to keep it isolated. So you've mentioned to us the fact that we're looking at in a very short space of time a new DirSync, or an upgraded DirSync. Can you give us some idea as we draw to a close as to what's coming down the track with Office 365? What can we expect? I mean, what are we likely to see in the future now that the rollout's going along and the new DirSync? I mean, what does the future hold?
Great question, and I would almost say that there are as you know, there's just things going on all of the time. Whether it's, and I'd mentioned this early on, that I think about a year ago we brought CRM Online in. People finally started to realize that, look, we have to roll out client updates. Workstations have to be up to date. They have to have patches just to have, say, Outlook be able to connect, things like that. So we've brought Intune Online in. I think I've heard rumors that there are several new services coming into the online fold within the next 6 to 9 months. I can't really say much about those services right now, but they will obviously be collaboration and productivity focused. And in the same way that we tie Exchange, SharePoint, Link, and all of those together so that each service works with each other, all of the services we bring in will obviously be extensions of that and will all work together. We had talked earlier about ADFS, and where it is a bit heavy, you could use DirSync for the password synchronization. I'd forgotten to mention that EDUs to this day still use, or they use Shibboleth or SAML 2.0 for their authentication. Now, I will say that since DirSync only supports Active Directory as the directory for synchronization, there are some customers out there, this is not for the faint of heart, but you can have separate directories to work with Shibboleth and provide that same level of single sign-on. So DirSync and ADFS work together as two sides of the same coin to give you identity and authentication. Some customers, predominantly the EDU space, and this isn't such a new thing, it came out about 6 months back, but I wanted to let everyone know about this, that if ADFS is not your cup of tea, or you're using SAML or Shibboleth, SAML 2.0 or Shibboleth as an authentication method, you can, I repeat, you can use that for authentication and get into Office 365 services. And I'd forgotten to mention that a bit earlier because I didn't want to lock people into either a Microsoft solution or not. The identity side with DirSync is a requirement. But for authentication, they could use Shibboleth and SAML 2.0, and documentation was released several months ago that do go through a step-by-step of the components and what you would need to enable that. But of course, there's still servers to be required and lots of configuration. So as you mentioned, I think people will take a step back and look at that DirSync password sync as a more viable option. In terms of moving forward, as many of on the call probably know, we're in the middle of an upgrade. So the BPOS to Office 365 migration, and it was a migration from a single data center into multi-data centers depending on service. This Office 365 or 14 as we're calling it to Wave 15 or Office 2013 environment is an upgrade, which means that anyone on the call that's gone through the BPOS transition probably remembers some of those issues. This is a simple upgrade of mailboxes, SharePoint sites, and so forth. So we expect to see very minimal hiccups or bumps in the road. In that we're not moving to different data centers. There's not a lot of churn. It's simply scheduling a tenant, and that tenant and all of its users and mailboxes and so forth will simply be upgraded into the new 2013 environment. So I believe the way that it works now is they will be given a information about 30 days before they transition. To let them know, here's what you need to do, you're on the schedule, and they do it over a weekend. And when users come in Monday morning, they will see a new pretty blue UI. They'll see, administrators will see immensely new capabilities, management capabilities, features, and functions, and users will see a new portal, right? Providing and basically pulling together everything into this one portal, giving them their links to Outlook and Calendar and SharePoint and SkyDrive Pro, which is a SharePoint My Site, so to speak. But really pulling it all together, the team really wanted to make a concerted effort to not point people in 5 different directions. They wanted everything in one place to where users could find and use those services. And so all of this is part of the upgrade process and is happening now. And we're hoping by the end of this year to have everyone moved over. We've done maybe, last I heard, over 300,000 tenants, and that's tenants, not including the seats. So we've done massive amount of upgrades, and so far everything's gone very smoothly. So if anyone is in Office 365 today, look out for that email that states that you are on the upgrade schedule, and you'll be receiving emails soon about administrative and end user tasks on what they need to be thinking about, considerations, upgrade of DirSync, and things like that. And hopefully the next time we chat, you will be on the new Office 365 and realizing some of these great new features and functions and services that we've been talking about today.
Excellent. Well, I think we're drawing to our time. We need to thank Ryan for all the valuable information and the time that he's dedicated to us today. I think it's been fantastic. I think it's really gone into a level on the ADFS and the explanation around it that will help a lot of people understand better what it is, and hopefully at least give them the impetus to start looking at DirSync and be prepared for that new tool. So, Ryan, how can people get in contact with you if they've got any questions or want to follow up with you?
Yes, email is ryanph, R-Y-A-N, Paul Henry, @Microsoft.com. I'm usually online 6 to 7 days a week, probably like you, Robert, and I do just about everything there is in online services. So if you get stuck on an issue, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to help.
Excellent. Well, I think that's fantastic, and everybody who's on the call obviously appreciates Ryan the time that you've given us and the information. And to round it off, is there sort of one like a general summary you can give us? I mean, what do you think is the major takeaway people should have from today?
Well, hopefully people understand that Office 365 is not heavily Microsoft-centric. Yes, all of our services run either 2010 or 2013 as part of an overall package of services, but we service Android, iOS, iPhones, iPads, you name it, we can support it. The application integration into the services is just amazing. And over the last, I would say 2007 to 2010, people have kind of lost focus in terms of how these apps can really work together to provide some really compelling functionality, whether it's workflows or IM and presence that can go to conference calls that can be elevated to Skype. There's just so many things you can do with this service. And on top of that, all of the services are really linked, both in so many different ways. So whether it's messaging, that's emails that are being sent over to CRM Online, and the CRM Online updates are being synced back down to your Exchange mailbox contacts, while your workstation, it has a Intune Online client that's checking your inventory, making sure that it's ready for the upgrade itself, right, to move from 365 into our new services. There are just so many features and functions that come along with this that it would take us several hours really to dig into all of them. So my hope is everyone will just take a look. If you go to www.office365.com, you can create a trial. Small business, small to mid-size, you can do an enterprise, gives you 30 days, I believe 20 seats, and does allow you to go in and do all the things we talked about today. Even DirSync, ADFS, you can even set up an Exchange environment and do rich coexistence and so forth. So many different things that can be done. It really comes down to your business and what you're looking to accomplish. And if you get stuck, please reach out to me. We've got tons of documentation on just about every facet that we've discussed today, and I'd be happy to help you get it set up and maybe trial it and see what you think about it.
That's excellent, Ryan. So again, I thank Ryan on behalf of everybody who's on the call today for all the information, obviously the time that he's given us today, and again, that great offer around if you do get caught up. So I'll take this opportunity to again thank Ryan for his time and to sign off from this Need to Know podcast from the Computer Information Agency. Thanks for listening. This podcast has been brought to you by the CIAOPS publications. For more information, visit www.ciaops.com/publications. To provide feedback on this podcast, visit www.ciaops.com/contact.